Hello, I'm James Rovira. I've recently released two edited anthologies. The first one to come out was Rock and Romanticism, Blake, Wordsworth, and Rock from Dylan to U2. It came out at the beginning of February with Lexington Books. And the second one is Rock and Romanticism, Post-Punk, Goth, and Metal as Dark Romanticisms. Came out with Palgrave Macmillan at the beginning of April this year. Now, since I've done something a little unusual, which is release two edited anthologies within 2 months of each other with the same top level title, I thought I should explain myself a little bit. I'm in good standing with both publishers. I'm working on additional projects for both of them, and but I thought it would help if I explained, why this is the case and what the difference is between these two volumes. What we have, what I did when I started this project was, which was around 2015, was I was living in Ohio. I'd been there about, I don't know, 6 years. And I wanted to do something dedicated to the state of Ohio. And what stood out for me about the state of Ohio, one thing, was the importance, the significance of rock and roll to that state. I mean, besides the fact that it seems like every band in the world comes through Columbus or Cleveland, you also have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame there. And in a different building, you have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame Library and Archives. It's a great place to work, wonderful holdings. Check out their website. Great staff, too. They were very helpful. I've worked there 2 or 3 times now, researching these and other projects. So I wanted to do something related to rock music in Ohio, maybe something in the area of rock and literature. So what I wanted to do initially was develop a honors course, like a 200 level honors literature course devoted to music and literature, particularly rock music and literature. So I emailed the Nasser listserv, which is a main Romanticism listserv, asking for suggestions, pairings, because I do quite a few, but of course, the hive mind is very helpful too. I got wonderful, overwhelming response. It was just really good. And I thought, well, if people are this interested in this subject, maybe I should release a call for papers, and I did. Another thing that happened around the same time was I met the photographer Taylor Fix. She helped me buy a camera for my daughter at Best Buy. And it took a while. Her and her friend both helped me out. And I don't know, probably an hour. She was very helpful. It was great. And in the process, we were just chatting, and she told me about her own photography. She takes wedding photography, graduation photography, and she shoots a lot of rock photography. And when I checked it out, it was amazing. So these cover photos are hers. All right, this is her photography, and you can see why. um, anyways, it's great work. So I spoke to the director of the Diane Kidd Gallery at Tiffany University, Lee Fernside, and I asked her if she would be interested in staging an exhibit about rock and roll in Ohio. She loved the idea. So I put her in touch with Taylor. And then her and her partner, Holly, found, I think, 4 other photographers. And an exhibit it wound up running last fall, I think, for about 6 weeks. It was great. I have the exhibit catalog. It was a really cool thing to do. Well, in response to that call for papers, I got 50 chapter proposals. And of course, not all of them came through, but I still received, I think, 25, 26 actual chapters, which is far too much really for a single anthology if the chapters are more than about 5,000 words. And then the other problem I had was that, people were advising me don't send 2 book proposals at once to the same publisher. Even the series editor advised me not to do that because that makes publishers nervous. And I understand. So, I sent, different book proposals around. I had the Blake, Wordsworth, and Rock from Dylan to YouTube proposal accepted by Lexington Books. I had the post-punk goth and metal version accepted by Palgrave Macmillan. They're both great publishers to work for, great series editors. Scott Calhoun over at Lexington and Katz Montiel at Palgrave were both very good. Um, and they made things better. They really helped to make these books better. Um, and I think because it happened, within a couple months of each other, um, I couldn't really know which one would actually be published first. But Palgrave Macmillan actually committed to publish first, so that's kind of what I had in mind. As it turns out, also the essays, the chapters, I should say, fell into these categories. There was a whole group, like 13 of them, that were related to goth or dark themes or things like that. And then of the other group, the other 12 or so, um, almost all of them were either primarily engaging Blake or primarily engaging Wordsworth. There was like one outlier in that group that discussed Percy Shelley and Mick Jagger's reading of Adonais at the Hyde Park concert after Brian Jones's death. And then there's another one that's really interesting, I placed at the end, um, related to Piero Ciampi by an Italian musicologist who related this 1960s pop singer who's musically isn't really rock. He's kind of closer to Dean Martin, but he was still in the area of pop music, to Italian Romanticism of the late 19th century. Really interesting essay, a chapter I wanted to include it because it engaged some European Romanticism. I didn't have anybody else writing about Italy in either of them, I don't think. So I really wanted this one in there. So I had a group that was mostly Blake and Wordsworth and a group that was mostly related to Gothic themes. And it was interesting is the Blake and Wordsworth group were mostly writing about classic rock. Even if the classic rock was released in the late 2000s, like Blackberry Smoke is one of our essays. And that band is recording now. It's very popular, but it's Southern rock. So the genre, could be considered classic rock if you extend that definition to like 70s rock. Um, the stuff that came out of the 60s. And then, of course, the ones engaging Gothic texts or tropes or theory, for the most part, tended to be focused on music from around 79 or 80 and forward. So it began with when post-punk music actually started coming out. Um, I would say the distribution of romantic figures engaged is pretty wide, but Byron's a lot more important in that edition than in others. And there is, again, an initial chapter about Percy Shelley and the Rolling Stones. Um, but this one has to do with sympathy for the devil. And it really starts with John Milton. And that would be the post-punk and goth edition of Palgrave. So these two books, very different in their coverage. One seems to be mostly focused on first generation romantics, and the other one is mostly focused on second generation romantics. But there is a Shelley chapter in the first one, and there is there's Blake and Wordsworth throughout the second one, but I wouldn't say there are any chapters that are primarily focused on him. And let me tell you, it was a great project. I had many contributors email me saying, "Man, I'm so glad I'm a part of this. I'm having so much fun." You know, how often do you say that about chapters you write for edited anthologies? It was great to hear, especially coming from so many people. Now, as it turns out, the order of release was quite felicitous, I think, because the first book that came out, Rock and Romanticism, Blake, Wordsworth, and Rock, from Dylan to YouTube by Lexington Books, um, it covers first generation romantics, and it kind of states the thesis, which is that rock and roll for historical reasons. I'm arguing, I'm using Sayer and Louvie's Romanticism against the tide of modernity, and many to theorize this project, and many of the contributors do the same. Um, isn't just influenced by English Romanticism and other Romanticisms, which is obvious. I think influence is obvious, and that's been described in a lot of prior scholarship. But it's arguing instead that it is Romanticism historically continuous with Romanticism as we identify it today as a literary movement. And so that obvious influence is there for a reason. They were fellow travelers, they were romantics. Um, Now, if you want to see how we construct that argument, you'll have to read the books, okay? But the first one kind of stated the thesis. The Lexington books one, this one, states the thesis that rock and roll is Romanticism, and it's kind of a repetition, and it's driven by very similar historical forces like industrialism, worldwide capitalism, and so on. Now, the second book, so to Romanticism as a whole. Okay, the second book then, Post-Punk, Goth, and Metal is Dark Romanticisms, Palgrave, Macmillan, um, extends that thesis to Goth. And then, of course, it has to engage, Gothic literature and Goth music and emo. There's a chapter on emo, and and all the themes related to that. So one could be seen as stating the big thesis and dealing with first generation romantics, and the second could be seen as extending the thesis to another area and dealing with second generation romantics. Now, the introductions, they have some material in common, but they're not identical. Okay, so when I'm surveying the history of the term romanticism, that's the same in both chapters. I mean, there's only so many different ways I'm able to do that. And then when I talk about how Sayer and Louvie's book fits into that history of the term, that's pretty much the same in both books. There's some variations, there's some editing going on, things like that. But those parts are pretty much the same. Of course, the chapter summaries are different in both. And then also, what I do in the post-punk and goth edition is I have to supplement this other discussion with a discussion about the Gothic. And then because we're engaging with female musicians and some female romanticists and romantics, like Mary Shelley especially, it has to extend the discussion of the Gothic to the female Gothic. So I talk about the Gothic in the introduction, talk about the female Gothic in the introduction. And because, John Milton starts the post-punk edition, I state a thesis. It's kind of bold. I think it's not completely counterintuitive, and it's not really that crazy. And it's based on my prior discussion of Sayer and Louvie. But I argue in the post-punk edition that John Milton was not the inspiration for Romanticism, but was himself England's first Romantic poet. That English Romanticism begins with John Milton. And that comes out of my discussion of the Gothic in relationship to Romanticism, which what you see in all this discussion is that you seem to have parallel trends of pastoral literature and this Gothic or dark literature running side by side and coexisting in the same space at the same time, and sometimes written about by the same authors. Now, come on, read the first edition of Lyrical Ballads and you tell me how many dead people are in it, okay? I don't think it's, I mean, does it really matter? Does it really matter if you die out in the middle of a field, or if you're lost at sea, or if a bunch of shipmates die, or if you're just dead at the cellar or in the basement of a Gothic mansion? You're dead, okay? And the poetry's about death. So I think there's these two trends are kind of like twin brothers or twin sisters. They belong together, and I think that begins really and in earnest with John Milton's Paradise Lost. And I really think the protagonist and antagonist are Eve and the snake, not God, not Adam, not Christ, Eve. Eve is the focal point of the narrative conflict in Paradise Lost. She's the hero. And the snake, Satan, is the villain. All right. And she was, her decision is what mattered ultimately. Um, and I think, Milton putting these two together, okay, in the same work, is what inaugurated Romanticism. And it's not just that, because obviously those two things are together in a lot of medieval literature. But there's a character of Satan himself, who is a very powerful character who can generate some sympathy for the readers. And I see this when I teach it to students all the time. They do sympathize with the devil to an extent as a character with motives and a history. And hey, meet his family, sin and death. Um, so you have this powerful figure of Satan, a powerful rebellious figure, which in the first chapter of the post-punk and goth edition is the basis of romantic Satanism, and then which carries forward into rock music starting in the 60s. So that's the difference between these two books. I think if you like one, you'll want to read the other. And I think they're so different from one another in their approach and their focus that they don't substitute for each other at all. They cover different musicians. They take different approaches. They're focused on first and second generation romantic poets, and then they seem to have created something of a parallel between 60s and early 70s rock music and late 70s and beyond. Okay, so I think we see a split in rock beginning with post-punk and punk and new wave around the mid-70s between first and second generation in a sense. That's parallel to the traditionally understood split between first and generation romantic poets, especially in England. And you have, the Vietnam War intervening in both cases, and you have the Napoleonic Wars intervening. Okay. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I would like to encourage you to order both of them for your libraries if you're interested in the subject. Like I said, I think it'll be an enjoyable read for you, especially if you're reading about your favorite band or musician. And I'd also like to encourage you to consider submitting a chapter proposal. I have two more of these in the works. I have one that's going to be titled tentatively Women in Rock, Women in Romanticism. I want to compare female musicians of the late 20th and early 21st century to female romantics, or even if it's not limited to female musicians to female romantics, it might be male romantics. I want to explore the same kind of themes in the music produced by these women, and maybe bring to light what they have in common with the women who produce this literature in the traditionally understood Romantic era. And I also have a David Bowie version coming out, David Bowie and Romanticism. Well, it's not coming out. It's in the works. I have a CFP. I have some interest in both. I have some chapter proposals coming in, but some people are, whatever date I posted previously is out the window. Some people just need longer to work on this. So email me at jamesrovira, Rovira, all one word, at gmail.com if you'd like to submit a chapter proposal to either of these, Women in Rock, Women in Romanticism, or David Bowie and Romanticism. We have some engagement of women in these first two books, but not enough. I really would like that to be a focus of a single anthology devoted just to that topic. Anyways, that's what's going on with these two anthologies. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, or if you're interested in being a reviewer for these, just email me. Thank you. Have a good day.